I count 20 heartbeats because counting calms me, and because if my hands stop shaking I can pretend I'm in control. 20 small, frantic rhythms pressed against the thin wall of a donated van whose heater is fighting the cold and losing. 20 faces tucked under blankets dark with sleep, the kind that doesn't know yet the world calls their names unnecessary. I can feel each one through the van's floor. Not literally, I know that sounds like something from a story, but the empathic tug is sharp and particular. Fear, hunger, the clench of a child who learned to sleep without dreaming because the world might take the breath out of them in the morning. I should be dead, or in a cell, or both. Instead, I have 20 tiny lungs rising and falling, and the extinction protocol folded into the pocket of my jacket like a smoking thing. Dominic Ashford put his signature at the bottom with the calm hand of a man who always believes authority is mercy. Population control, Vanessa said, smiling as if they were serving cake. Mercy is what they call killing people and calling it policy. I stole 20 kids at night. It sounds so simple when you say it like that. It isn't. The night they called me Barren on the crescent moon floor, a verdict spat like a curse, I swore I would never let anyone else be judged by a measure they did not consent to. You learn to keep vows when you've been told you are nothing more than the spaces you cannot fill. You learn to rent your hands and let your feet remember roots out of the pack. You learn to love small, stubborn lives as if they were your own. The van coughs. My vision edges white at the corners because I've been awake too long. Adrenaline and stress and the push to move faster. Outside, the world is white and thoughtless. A storm that thinks in gusts. The wipers make a staccato rhythm across the windshield. I reconsider trying to find a motel and laugh, a dry, too loud sound. For the rescue to work, I need distance. I need borders that smell of different pines. I need somewhere that believes asylum means protecting the vulnerable, not purging them. The memo had been tucked in an envelope marked internal. A clerk with too much resignation had slid it across with the keys to the nursery van and an apology so small I could have missed it. I didn't so much read the memo as feel it. The words were cold and bureaucratic and precise. 20 orphans. Extinction. Signed. Approved. Dominic's name underlined like a command. I fold the page again and put it into my pocket. It rubs against my ribs like an accusation and a justification at once. We'll cross the ridge before dawn, I tell the sleeping faces in the back as if they can understand. In truth, they do. They always do. The empathic pull is a map of emotions, and in that map every child is a house with a single light left on. I'm the kind of thief who rescues because I can't live with myself otherwise. That, I tell myself, is the right kind of selfishness. We hit black ice 3 miles out. The van surges and lurches like a beast with an injured hind leg. I jam my palm on the wheel and whisper something sharp and useless at it. The van decides to obey by degrees. Snow slaps the windshield in sheets. The world narrows to headlights in my breathing. There's a sound behind us that doesn't belong to the storm. Tires too clean to be coincidence. A radio voice I haven't heard in months scrapes my name like a file against glass. Elias Parker, stop the vehicle and submit to inspection on behalf of Crescent Moon. Dominic would have liked the law to be a blunt instrument. Dominic would have liked the extinction protocol to read like a checklist you don't question. I don't stop. I fuss with the glove compartment for the keys to the emergency release. The kids jostle in their sleep. A small boy murmurs a name that might be his mother, might be a dream. My chest tightens with a phantom grief I know too well. The empathic pull crescendos into a single bright alarm. One of them wakes, fear like metal in his throat. I kiss the top of his head and push the van faster. Physics is a thing Dominic and Vanessa try to pretend not to understand. They think if you control the paperwork, you control the world. They do not account for stubbornness. The radio call becomes an order. Orders are less dangerous than bullets in this part of the country, though they can move you into lines people never come back from. We skid, then find traction, then lose it again. Somewhere in the spin everything moves slow and hyperreal. Flurries like confetti, the tiny hand of a girl curled against her own cheek, my pulse like a drum in my throat. I call the ridge on a phone pressed into my palm like a talisman. My thumb hesitates before I tap Ken Gray's number. Ken, the second, the one whose voice is steady as a hearth in a storm. The number sits in my contacts like a promise I never intended to redeem. I think of the ridge's borders, the bloodline of the Frost Valley that runs cold and hard through me, and I speak. Ken, I say, because names still matter even when you steal people. I need help. He doesn't ask who. He already knows. He says, hold your position and keep the kids warm. We'll intercept at the Eastern Pass. I tell him where I am, even though we're both silent about the more dangerous truth. The van is bleeding distance, and the crescent moon will not waste time with formalities. Ken says, stay with me. And that's not a plea. It's a command tempered by concern. It's the first steady thing that's happened to me in a very long time. The chase is a blur of pine shadows and headlights, and then the oblique blue of Ken's vehicle appearing like a lighthouse. Their headlights are bigger, steadier. I pull off into a line of trees, and the van sounds like a living thing breathing hard. The kids huddle under blankets like birds under a wing. Ken walks up like someone who has been told to expect blood and instead found a small ragged flock. He counts them with a glance that says he has done this before and reserves judgment for a later time. The ridge doesn't do chaos casually. They do it with a plan and a measured hand. Alphas are approaching, he says, and I want to scoff because the way an old story says alpha carries pomp. But the ridge's alphas are not stories. They are three men whose presence is the kind of weather you respect. They're triplets, the rumor says. Obsidian Ridge, they call themselves, like an answer to all the names the council chooses to forget. I had never seen them before tonight, only scents and rumors. But now they stand in front of the van with snow on their shoulders and eyes that take the room. Ashton is the middle, an evenness in bone and voice and posture. His eyes are the color of stale ice measured. Kieran is the left, a flash of gold, teeth too quick for his usual calm. He carries the air of someone who will break a knife, but probably not a person for sport. Wyatt stands to the right with green eyes like melted moss, and when he smiles, something soft in me, long ignored, unclasps. They don't come in like heroes. They come in like judges who have decided to be kind. Ashton says, "You ran a long way." His voice is precise. Kieran says, "Who signed those papers?" Like the fury in his mouth is mechanical, a weapon honed for misuse. Wyatt doesn't speak. He reaches, and his hand on the van door is right where panic goes to sleep. "You brought them across the Crescent border," Ashton says. "That complicates things." "People getting killed is complicated?" I answer, and the sarcasm is louder to me than it needs to be. The ridgemen smile at me like people who have heard stubbornness come up against practicality before. Ken stands just behind them, his hands folded, like a man who steadies storms. "We can shelter them," Wyatt says, as if comfort were a noun he can hand across a table. He steps closer, and the scent of pine and smoke and something warm and domestic washes over me, something that picks at a scar I've covered with too many sweaters. The children stir at the rich, clean smell, and their breathing eases. Empathy is a blunt instrument. The ridge's presence calms them like a lullaby. "On our terms," Ashton adds. "Protection requires reciprocity. We have rules. Rules are the only thing that hold complex people together when their hearts are raw. Crescent Moon breaks rules like treaties. Obsidian Ridge builds a fortress with them. They will protect the children. I know that in my bones. They also want me." That is the piece that twists like a hook. In a world where being an Omega means something complicated, where Barren is a brand burned into you because your body refused to comply with a narrative others wrote, being taken under a pact's wing often requires an exchange. A pact's claim is not theft in their law. It's a pledge of shelter and blood in return for your loyalty. Some people like living that way. Some people have it forced upon them and call it survival. I have always lived in the gap between those categories. Tonight I have to choose. I do the math in a way that has nothing to do with numbers. 20 lives for autonomy. Which price is mine to pay? Which price can the world afford? Ashton studies me like an exam. Kieran corners the van and unlocks it with hands not quite gentle, Hands that, despite their strength, are the kind that can fix a bad fracture or cradle a frightened child. Wyatt limps a little. I notice and then chastise myself for noticing. Ken stands at ease and steady. The triplets move as a unit and as individuals, three shapes of protection that fit around danger like an armature. We will shelter them, Ashton repeats. You can stay here while we sort their care, but you must come with us to the ridge proper. There will be questions. You will answer them. What I won't do is sell them back to Crescent Moon, Kieran says. His voice is a blade with a velvet handle. We kill no child under any sign from Dominic Ashford. Good, I say. Good is small for 20 lives. I have to keep my words small so they don't balloon into threats I can't back up. Ken looks at me long enough that my jaw tightens. You either come of your own will, he says, or we claim you under protective foot, until we can resolve the legalities. Either way, you stay on Ridge property. Claim me? The words are a hot electric thing across my skin. There is pain behind that word. History, control, being treated like a piece of property with feelings. Because I'm a thief? No, Wyatt says quietly. Because this pack thinks protection requires more than shelter. You took action. You stood in front of people who were being condemned. That matters here. That doesn't mean you can make me kneel to your glory, I say. The humor in my voice crashes like a thin bridge across grease. Nobody asked you to kneel to glory, Ashton replies. But the Ridge demands commitment if you accept Gift and Haven. We will ask for your answer with all transparency. You can refuse. The children do not leave while we decide. There's a small chorus of children's breaths and small animal noises from the back, and my resolve is a line in shifting sand. I think of the names on the memo. I look at a child's lashes, dusted with snow and indecision. I look at the journal in my coat pocket, the small worn leather book my mother hid under the floorboards the night she left me an envelope and a map. I took it with me the night I left Crescent Moon for good, because heritage is a dangerous thing and also because sometimes knowing where you come from is survival. You know who I am? I ask. Even asking the question uses more courage than I have. My voice cracks, thin and tinny. The Ridge hums with its own steady heart, and I feel like a moth stepping into a light that might warm me or burn me. Ken nods. We know enough, but we need proof to take this to the council and make an unassailable case. Not everyone believes in the stories of Frost Valley. Bring the journal to the Ridge study room. We'll read it. We'll compare blood samples. We'll not hand these kids over to a man who thinks extinction is policy. His words climb into my chest like a stair to a place I didn't think I'd reach. For the first time in a long while, I have people who will help me make my claims hard, and not just faith. For the first time, the journal might not be a relic of a woman who hid secrets to keep me alive. It might be a stone throne that breaks a window in a council chamber. I hand Ken the van keys. My fingers skid on the metal like a confession. I stop because hunger is a thing I don't have time to attend to until later, and because admitting need has been expensive for me. We'll tend to you, Wyatt says. It's not pity. It's a plan. Now move. We don't have much time until the patrol reaches the pass. We move like people who have practiced escape. Ken shepherds kids like a middle school teacher on a field trip. Ashton surveys the perimeter with a surgeon's eye. Kieran carries a bundle that makes him frown in a way that loosens some of the danger from his face. I bring up the rear with the journal burning against my ribs. The Ridge compound, when it appears, is a rise of dark stone and warm windows in the white. It smells of wood smoke and discipline. I want to say it smells like home, but home has been unstable for me for a long time. Inside, they put the children into a warm room with quilts and food, and an unspoken rule that adults making noise right now must be gentle. Ken watches me while I set the journal on a table and rest my hands near it like a promise. He doesn't touch, though it's tempting. The leather looks older than my entire life. We'll secure them, Ashton says. You will be tended to. Then we talk about the consequences of what you did and why. We ask for your consent regarding claim, Kieran adds, and I notice how his words attempt to be procedural, even when his fingers drum a cadence that says he's worried for me in a way he struggles to explain. Consent. It's a word that has been used poorly in my life. When they told me I could not be a father, they said it as a verdict, not a discussion. Consent had never needed to mean, do you want medical procedure? It had been, for other people at other times, a checkbox signed off by men with authority. To be asked to consent now is like being offered a fork that could feed you. The fork also signifies submission in their lexicon. That is the thing I have to contend with. Saving the kids might mean giving myself to a system I have always taught my feet to avoid. The Ridge's med team, a soft-eyed woman who looks like milk and a gruff man with hands the size of platters, cones off a corner to check the children. They move with the kind of efficiency that calms me. Empathy does not make me useful in a medical sense. It makes me a map of feelings I cannot heal. The med woman, whose name is Rosie, looks at our files and moves her hands like a healer moving through a familiar hymn. He's empathic, she says to Ken, voice low. He picks up the children's distress. It's why they're quiet with him. That sentence makes something in me ache. Being an empath in a pack means you are both a gift and a vulnerability. People will lean on you until you're hollow. They will use your ability because it comforts them, and sometimes they will punish you because your presence makes them measure their own coldness. How far does it go? Ashton asks. He's not unkind. He just needs parameters. We give them, mostly children and pups, emotional contagion that leaves me drained if I hold too many feelings at once, a tendency toward nausea if I let myself drown in others' trauma. The med team's tests confirm what I know. You cannot heal everything by feeling it. You can only stand in the room with those who suffer long enough to be an unsentimental mirror. After the kids sleep, after the Ridge's kitchens fill the air with soup, Ashton and Kieran and Wyatt sit in the study, the journal between them like a relic passed around the way you might pass a fragile heirloom. Ken leaves to coordinate with patrols and guards and the Ridge's legal counsel. The Ridge has lawyers because they have to deal with a council that prefers to use statutes like hammers. Tell us about the tests, Ashton says to me. His voice bends no judgment, it commits to understanding. I tell them. I tell them how the tests were performed. Sterile lights. The breathlessness of deception when a man tells you he knows you better than you know yourself. I tell them about the room with glass walls and the nurse who smiled like a blade. I tell them about the verdict. Barren. It was not phrased as a medical diagnosis at first. It was phrased as a sentence. The council presented the tests on a floor like evidence. They carried the verdict like proof of unworthiness. Kieran's jaw tightens. Wyatt's fingers tap the table in little anxious clocks. Ashton checks the edges of the journal, as if to see whether the leather will bite. Did you ever feel incomplete? Ashton asks, not asking for pity, asking for truth. I laugh then because humor is the only shield I've mastered. All the time. The laugh is little and sharp and then it's gone. They measured the space where I should fit and pointed at me and said I didn't. It's easier to believe the test than to face the fact my mother lied to protect me. The journal sits like a small detonator between us. I've not opened it fully in front of them. I didn't plan to. It was not for them once. It was for me, the fragments of a woman who knew how to disappear into shadows and leave me room to live. Let me see it, Ashton says. I pull the journal's clasp and the smell of old paper like rain on stone rises. The pages are slanted, neat handwriting, Eleanor Frost's handwriting, when I was old enough to recognize loops like signatures. My throat tightens. I read out loud passages I've hidden all my life, references to Frost Valley's line, snippets about lineage and obligations, a passage about a family that had to dissolve roles to protect something bigger. The triplets listen like men learning a history the council tried to excise. This is evidence, Ashton says when I finish, and the word is both promise and weapon. If we cross-match your blood with historical samples and link it to the journal, the council will have to answer why a family line was targeted. Why would they target a lineage? Kieran asks, incredulous. Power consolidates, I say. Fear is manufactured. They don't want an alternative, they want obedience. If Frost Valley's bloodline carried a capacity for leadership they feared, they killed off threat under name of policy. Wyatt reaches for my hand then, in a way neither tender nor invasive, His fingers fold over mine with a steady warmth. The motion, small as it is, feels like reprieve. "You didn't steal names tonight," he says. "You stole futures. You stole possibility. We'll make the council account for that." We plan because planning is the Ridge's language for hope. Ken coordinates witness statements and outlines legal strategies. They tell me they have friends in the council, and that not all members are Dominic's puppets. They have allies we can call. They require proof. The journal, blood, witnesses from inside Crescent Moon who would testify. They require me to be prepared to stand in a chamber and say what I know. That is terrifying. Standing and saying true things in front of men with gavels is something I have not mastered. When we bring this to the council, Ashton says, we will not ask for mercy. We will demand accountability. We will open them to the public. Dominic will not like public. Dominic likes the quiet of corridors where decisions can be made with signatures and smiles. Paper doesn't terrify him as much as exposure. The Ridge's plan is to pull the curtains from the theater of his policies and let the light show the stain. I feel like a spear in the hand of these men. I also feel, quietly, like a person who might be allowed to speak. That's dangerous in a different way. We sleep a little. I keep the journal close. In the morning, the Ridge has made space for us in the wing that overlooks a courtyard of stone and pines. The children have faces like soft dawn. They eat porridge and ask for second helpings. I sit on the edge of a cot and smell the scent of stew and burning wood, and I realize how small things like warmth can feel like salvation. Wyatt sits beside me and hands me a bowl. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in a while," he says without pretense. "Gee, thanks, psychiatrist number 4. I answer, because humor is a salve, and also because I like jesting with men who have green eyes. He grins properly, and his grin is like a curve of safe harbor. Kieran joins with a thermos and a grin that's all teeth. "Eat," he orders. "You're making our job harder if you're fainting from moral righteousness." "I faint from irony," I say, "not from porridge." The morning moves us into realms of the practical. Signatures on a form that says Ridge will bear responsibility for the children while the case proceeds, the med team drawing blood, and the clergy. The Ridge doesn't worship like the Crescent Moon, but they have rights of recognition, giving us a small service to mark the transition of the children into Ridge care. For those kids who have been counted as unimportant, the small rights matter terribly. A name tag, a stitched blanket, a bowl with a name on it. These are sacred. Later, Ashton asks for a private moment with me. We stand in a corridor lined with pines carved into the wood. He is formal and carefully unreadable. He has the look of a man who keeps his thoughts like weapons folded into his sleeves. "You understand the claim," he says. "We can file for temporary protective claim, which includes you. The claim is for your safety. It is also for union. The Ridge protects those who attach to it. You'll be a part of the pack if you accept." I taste the word attach, and it's both invitation and danger. I spent most of my life being told I would break when something asked too much of me. "I don't know how to be claimed," I say honestly. "They called me Barren. They said I couldn't belong because my body didn't do as they expected." His eyes soften minutely. "Barren as an accusation says more about them than you. This isn't about fertility or the ability to give life. It's about the capacity to be family. That is not a test for your body. It's a promise you can choose." Choice. There is a trembling, delicate thing about being offered a choice when the world had been so quick to impose a verdict. My chest tightens. I think of a small boy in the back of the van chewing his blanket. I think of Eleanor's handwriting and the way her words formed a path out of small, mean rooms. I think of how it felt to hold 20 lives and not know where to put them. "If I stay," I say slowly, making sure each syllable is deliberate, "what's expected of me?" "As a member of the pack, you will have certain obligations," Ashton says. "You will train. You will participate in defense. You will speak for the children in council if necessary. You will not be sold to another pack." "And if I refuse?" I ask, because asking that question is like testing a rope's strength. "You may refuse," Ashton says. "But the children remain here until safe placement is arranged." Crescent Moon cannot take custody while an appeal is in progress, and we have enough witnesses and documentation to make a case. You won't be forced, but you'd lose the shield the Ridge provides. The offer is a gauntlet and a shelter in the same breath. I weigh the cost like meat on a scale. It occurs to me in a way that is almost a small violence that right now I don't care that the offer includes a claim. Right now, my ledger is simple. 20 lives, one option to keep them safe. My own agency is a sideshow I can reconsider tomorrow. Okay, I say, the words small and trembling. I clasp the journal like a holy thing and realize how obvious it must be that this woman's handwriting had haunted my life. Ashton nods as if he expected me to bend. Then we'll sign the temporary agreement, he says, and we'll begin gathering evidence. Ken returns with news. Patrols found debris from Crescent vehicles at the Eastern Pass, he says. Dominic is not happy. His enforcers are combing roads. He called the council and asked for immediate tribunal. The word makes the air change. Tribunal? I repeat. Fear is a cold thing under my skin. In my head, the council rooms are places of polished wood and cold lights, places where men decide who lives with a smile like an invoice. We expected he would try to make this about you, Ashton says. He will try to claim you set the children loose to undermine their authority. We will need witnesses and evidence to show it was Dominic's order that created the problem. We have the memo, Ken says. We have the journal. He looks at me as if collecting all these pieces into a picture requires my shy consent. We need you to be ready to speak about the memo's chain of custody and your actions. The tribunal will be a storm. It is also our chance. For all the dangers, for all the exposure, I know that if Dominic stands in front of a council and his signature hangs like a noose, and people hear what the Ridge has to say, then the children will be safer. And if the council removes Dominic, perhaps the policy that allowed extinction orders will be reviewed. Votes change policies. Policies change people. But tribunals bring public spectacle. They bring press. They bring Dominion's allies. They bring Vanessa with her smile that made a world friendly for murder. They will demand my testimony. They will dredge up my barrenness and make it theater. They will ask me to stand in front of men and be seen as less for what my body is or isn't. I feel the old shame twitch like a raw nerve. You will not let them make you a spectacle, Wyatt says quietly. He sits on the arm of my chair as if to anchor me. You will speak on what you know. We will handle the rest. Kieran glares into the space where Dominic should be. And if Dominic tries to make the tribunal about your private life, we'll act. Act how? I don't know. The Ridge's options are not always legal. They've told me that before. A pact keeps people safe sometimes by walking a line that legal counsel dislikes. But they promise to use evidence, not force. That's the thing I believe in about them. They prefer to wield light in the council chamber rather than swords in the courtyard. I have this, I say, pulling the folded memo from my pocket. The signature looks small and mundane on the paper, but it hums like a loaded pistol. I hand it to Ashton. The Ridge men exchange looks like conspirators. I feel ridiculous and proud at the same time. Eleanor's journal sits between my folded hands like an oath. We spend the afternoon making lists and practicing phrases I can use in court without giving judges the satisfaction of seeing me break. Ken stays by my shoulder most of the time. He doesn't ask for my past in the way other men asked. He asks for the present and how he can help. There is a steadiness about him I am unaccustomed to. It is possible, I think, to have people who hold you without expecting you to be broken entertainment for them. The group prepares with the Ridge's counsel, an older woman with a mouth like tempered steel who has experience peeling back official lies. We will make Dominic answer for his signature, she says. But this will not be easy. He has allies. He will attack character because that's what men like him do. Then we show them proof, Kieran says. We bring the journal, the DNA, and the testimony of those who saw the memo signed. We bring people who will not be frightened. They begin to reel out the names of potential witnesses. A clerk who slid the memo into my hands with a tiny apology. A mid-level enforcer who balked at the order. A nurse who took part in the tests and left afterward like someone who couldn't reconcile professional duty with conscience. The Ridge mobilizes like a quiet army. I watch them and feel, for the first time in a long time, like maybe something can be broken and rebuilt without the pieces being used to hurt other people. Night falls and there's a small ceremony for the children. A blanket stitched with the ridge sigil and a small knot ring they give to those who remain in their care. I think of rings as symbols and resist taking one, but when the ring is offered, it feels less like a claim and more like a promise from people who meant it. Wyatt slips the ring onto my finger with fingers warm and sure. The metal is cool against my skin, and the sensation is both ordinary and radical. Someone believes I deserve this. It's only a promise, Wyatt says softly. You can remove it if you choose. I feel a shaking shame and power at the same time. I accept because 20 sleeping faces rest on the ridge's quilts, and because for once, someone offered me a choice. We are building a war chest of evidence and a wall of public opinion. The ridge sends word to allies. Friends in the crescent moon who are not Dominic's followers send sympathy and cautious support. The council is, predictably, a minefield. But the ridge has patience and a network, and that is a dangerous thing for those who prefer quiet cruelty. That night I lie awake in a bunk and the journal in the pocket of my jacket seems to pulse. I run my thumb over the worn leather and think of my mother and the way she folded me into a map. I think of the nights I learned to count heartbeats because it made me less afraid. I think of the 20 small lives breathing in another room, whose innocence is a fragile fortress. I didn't plan to be a leader. I didn't plan to become a public figure with a history that could destabilize a council. I planned to be invisible and to rescue what I could. But the world doesn't politely let you remain small when you do loud, moral things. Those loud things echo, and sometimes the echo is a chorus that can topple small tyrants. As dawn reddens the pines like the first cautions of war, someone knocks at my door. Ken stands in the doorway, his face unreadable for once. We need you in the study, he says quietly. The triplets want to speak with you before the tribunal date is set. My stomach drops, though I don't know why. Perhaps because there is a distance between being protected and being displayed. Perhaps because the thought of standing in a room where men will decide to kneel or rise on behalf of a verdict makes my spine feel like a tight, unused rope. I follow Ken into a study that smells like polished wood and the hum of a place that has seen decisions. The triplets sit as if they have been waiting for a verdict of their own. Ashton gestures for me to sit. Before this goes public, he says, we need to know where you stand. This can change how you are perceived. Not only by the council, but by the pacts that watch. What do you want from me? I ask, because the question is a small, dull blade. We want your honesty, Kieran says. We want your consent to be part of our defense. And we want to make clear that if the council tries to make this about your private status, we will not allow it. This time, the proposal pulls at something hard inside me. They were already asking for my consent before the tribunal, to claim and to protect. Now they are asking me to be part of the public fight. Their confidence is no small thing. It is a scaffolding for a man who has been told he was nothing. I will speak, I say, but if the council tries to denigrate me to distract from its crimes, we fight them on that too. Wyatt reaches across the table and his grip is gentle. That's all we wanted to hear. Be honest. Speak about the children, about the memo, about what you saw. Let the evidence do the rest. Ashton nods. One more thing. If this tribunal becomes a spectacle about your barrenness, if they ask about your body and try to make it into a weapon, we will step in. We will do what we must. I inhale then, long and deep, and the ridge's air fills my chest like a different kind of promise. Maybe I had been wrong to think protection would require me to be broken. Maybe protection could be a place where pieces are mended. We rise then, and they walk me to the study door where I can hear the children playing in another room, a small noise like the world is remaking itself. Ken stands at the threshold. Rest now, he says. You'll need your voice. Outside the courtyard is a whitened bowl and the pines hold their breath. The ridge feels like an island with 3 kings and a second who holds the charts. For the first time in my life I have more than a root out. I have people who might shape their power toward keeping other people alive. I think of Dominic and Vanessa, and how little their signatures weighed against a child's breath. I think of the tribunal like a place with glass walls. and no curtains, where every breath you take can be turned into an exhibit. The courtrooms in Crescent Moon are all angles and polished surfaces that make you feel extra naked, even when you have a jacket on. People in power like they're light clinical. It makes cruelty look like an equation. I learned that early, the night they called me Barren in a room that felt airless with someone else's certainties. Now the same light would be turned on Dominic Ashford and his signature. We arrive with the ridge like an army of coal and quiet. The triplets send me into the chamber last, like some sacrament. They flank me on either side at the door, a human wedge of pines and rock. The public gallery is packed with faces, some curious, some already decided, and cameras that smell of cold electricity. I can smell soap and fear and the wax from someone's too heavy hair pomade. I can hear 20 small heartbeats like a memory, and the empathy inside me tightens until my stomach is a loop of rope. Dominic is there, pale and composed, like a man who has always believed being composed equals innocence. Vanessa leans into him and smiles the way a reef smiles, bright, sure of teeth. Chairman Morrison presides from a raised dais, his gavel at the ready like a judge's threat. Margaret Gray sits rigid as a carved tree on the council bench, eyes like someone who remembers both kindness and cruelty. They have their suits, their polished medals, their speeches, law, precedent, order. The room hums with the neat arrogance of people who think they can measure worth with ink. Ashton, Kieran, and Wyatt take seats visibly in the front row with Ken beside them. Their presence is a weather shift. The air curls around them and the gallery notices in a thin ripple. People who expected a spectacle are quieting into something else, curiosity that smells suspiciously like respect. For a moment I am a tiny island of rawness, scabbed, exposed, and then the ridge's heat folds around me like a blanket. The court opens in something like ritual. The clerk reads our names and the charges, and then Ken stands first and lays out the facts with a steady voice that leaves no room for Dominic's smiling evasions. He recounts the intercepted memo, the chain of custody from the clerk who slipped it to me, the vehicle paths, the timestamps. He speaks like someone who knows people will try to pick apart his words and finds the holes preemptively. The clerk walks in like a man who had been holding his breath too long. He wears a threadbare coat and a face that looks like a worry someone forgot to fold away. He takes the stand and his story is awkward and small and human. He speaks about the envelope, about the way his hands shook as he pushed it across the counter. He confesses the apology he gave me, small and cowardly, and the reason he couldn't stand by the paperwork when he saw what it meant. Watching him speak, I can see in the council's faces the first misgivings of people who have lived in a long shadow and never noticed the corners. Then our legal counsel stands. She is an older woman with a mouth honed by survival and law books, and she has a way of speaking so that the lies start to look ragged. She walks the council through a timeline the way an archer walks a bow, precise, arcing, impossible to dodge. She lays out the journal and the forensic tests. She reads passages from Eleanor Frost's handwriting, her voice reverent like an archivist speaking of a relic. The pages are read aloud into the room and something shifts. Names become lineage. Lineage becomes history. History becomes an accusation aimed square where Dominic thinks his power lives. When the genetic cross-match comes back, the air changes again. The lab techs are called, samples from the Ridge's archive, blood from the journal's sealed attachments, a living line that blinks to life under cold lights. The DNA speaks slowly but clearly. Frost Valley markers trace through my blood with the kind of inevitability a tide has. The markers on the pages where Eleanor had hidden a sample line up like fingerprints. Morrison sits through that revelation like a man being told his favorite story is suddenly a lie. Dominic's smile narrows just enough to look ugly. Vanessa clamps her jaw. The power to sign dead paper into policy with a grin becomes suddenly smaller under the microscope of facts. But Dominion and his defenders don't give up the stage easily. Dominic rises at last, voice liquid with cultivated outrage. He frames the memo as a necessary measure, a legal tool employed for stability, and he uses the old strategy. Turn the focus toward me. He talks about the costs of disorder, about the difficult choices leaders must make. In his telling, taking the children was a tragic necessity, and anyone who foiled policy is a dangerous actor. That's when he tries to make the spectacle about my body. He remarks loud enough to be heard across the room about the medical evaluations and how the pack needs to rely on the science. He says, with the smile of someone who thinks cruelty can be masked by pseudo-clinical language, "We have protocols regarding fertility and the maintenance of the pack's future." Those words are a bright torch aimed at the ugliest part of my life. The room feels suddenly thin. My chest flutters like a trapped bird. The memory comes back in a wash. Fluorescent lights, men with official faces, the nurse who used to smile like she had no business being kind. Dominic's words are meant to have teeth, to make me small, to make the gallery nod and tally me up as irrelevant. I answer. I tell the court about counting 20 heartbeats in the van. I tell them about the way fear can sit like a rock under someone's bones, the way children learn to breathe quietly so their breath won't be noticed. I describe the memo like an instrument of murder dressed in bureaucracy. I do not hide my voice shaking. I do not shove away the memory of the nurse's smile. Instead, I let the tremor be there, and, with it, the truth that trembles harder. 20 lives do not need your approval to exist, I say. My voice finds itself cracked but coherent. You call it control. I call it stopping murder. You can dress it in protocol and watch the ink dry, but a signature doesn't make anything moral. There is a moment of silence that vibrates in the room like a plucked string. People are not bored with spectacle anymore. They are listening like someone hearing a thing they once assumed was fiction. Then the witnesses we gathered are called. The nurse who withheld a signature after seeing the test processes, the mid-level enforcer who balked at the order and refused to carry a crate marked for extinction, a low-level archivist who admits he and others falsified some entries when asked. Each testimony is small and human, and together, they form an anatomy of complicity. Dominic tries to insist that these are outliers, rogue conscience moments, but the counterweight is already falling. Evidence piles like logs on a fire. Margaret Gray stands last. Her presence is an island of calm. I have seen in her eyes the brittle memory of my telling in nights past, the one that judged me without mercy. Now she clears her throat, and a house hushes into a reverent stillness that feels like the pause before weather. I have sat in this chamber for years, she says. Her voice is dry and lined with history. I have made decisions I thought would keep peace. I have allowed policies because they seemed to preserve order. I learned, she says slowly, that order without justice is just another tyranny. Her declaration lands like a stone. She confesses that she signed off on a series of recommendations years ago that allowed extinction protocols to be expedited if the council feared demographic instability. She says she did it to keep greater wars from starting. But the thing about compromises is that compromises can become excuses for cruelty under people who prefer not to look at consequences. She says she regrets what she signed because a person cannot build a future on the bones of children. There is a shift in the room like tectonic plates moving. A few gasps. A camera click. Dominic's face tightens to the servile expression of a man who believed he had chosen a safe course and now discovered himself naked. When the council does its thing, deliberation, argument, the ritual of impenetrable procedure, it takes less time than I feared. The evidence we've built is not a theatrical pile that can be easily dismissed. The public opinion that has slowly been coaxed by the Ridge's allies is not eager to return to the old comforts of blind deference. Dominic is stripped of rank, his voice of authority diminished to a private man's mutter. The council votes in an emergency measure to suspend certain protocols and to establish an independent review of policies that affect orphans and vulnerable pups. Dominic will be investigated for abuse of power and is forced to relinquish certain privileges. He is not executed for his order. This is not the place for melodramatic vengeance, but he is disrobed of the authority he abused. When the verdict reads and the gavel falls, the room tastes like a kind of rain, the wet, cold relief that comes after a drought of justice. People stand, some clapping thinly, others crying into their hands. Margaret Gray looks at me, and there is an apology in her eyes like unspooled thread. That's when the triplets move, and for a second the chamber holds its breath because no one had scripted what comes next. Ashton stands. Kieran stands. Wyatt stands. They walk toward the dais where I stand like someone waiting for a verdict, and then they kneel. It isn't the kind of forced kneel you see in stories where someone is humiliated. Their knees bend like a chosen blade folding. They kneel before the council and before me together, 3 men arranging themselves like a carved step. The cameras dart and the air fizzes with astonishment. For Dominic's allies, it's an act that looks like submission. For everyone else, it's a thunderous declaration that collapses these old games of dominance. Ashton rises a touch of his head in a movement that is both measured and sincere. "Elias Parker," he says, his voice steady as stone, "we kneel before you to declare that this pact's protection is yours by choice. We will not permit the council's machinery to weaponize your body, and we will stand publicly to assure those who doubt. You have our loyalty." Kieran's voice cuts like wire. "We kneel to show we are not puppets of a council that would sign children away," he says. "You saved lives. We owe you this witness." Wyatt's hands find mine then, in the public hush, fingers warm as hearth coals. "We kneel because you chose to act when others turned their eyes away. We pledge to you that this pact will be a place where no child is counted disposable." Kneeling in the council chamber is a spectacle. It is subversive in a way officials rarely plan for. The triplets have given the room a new image, not of dominance over a man whose body they might claim, but of respect toward a person whose action realigned their sense of what power was for. The gesture is political and personal at once, and it reads across the world like a new headline. The men who keep an entire ridge of people are publicly kneeling to the man they will now protect. For the headline writers, this is irresistible. The council cannot undo the image. Dominic's defenders sputter. Some cry crocodile outrage at the alleged breach of decorum. Others, quietly, have the look of people been tricked into seeing the human consequence of policies they defended. The votes already cast are not easily undone. Policies will now be questioned rather than rubber-stamped. Outside the chamber, protesters who had come prepared to shout mandated order are caught off balance. There are thin clusters of people who now chant gratitude and support, and in the space between, the cameras find the faces of the children who arrive hand in hand with Ridge medics. Their smallness next to adult men in formal robes is both shame and salvation. The images will fly. In the days that follow, the Ridge and I move into the next phase, making sure the legal muscles we've flexed actually hold. We make deposition calls, secure testimony, and tighten the chain of evidence. We build a public narrative not of me as a spectacle, but of the children as citizens worthy of life. We do not seek revenge. We seek structural change. As the dust settles, people begin to ask the question about me that I have spent a lifetime avoiding. What now? There is a strange tenderness to the way men who've seen me at my rawest ask it. The Ridge's offer has not changed. Temporary protective claim leading perhaps to something more permanent. I am not forced. I am asked with a steadiness that is disarming. There is also the matter of the ring. After the tribunal in a small room that smells of pine and old books, the triplets take my hands. They sit close, and for a few minutes nothing is said except that the world is finally permitting itself to be honest. "We knelt once publicly," Ashton says softly. "We did it because it was right, but we all understand the difference between politicking at a dais and a personal pledge." Kieran eyes me with that fierce softness he keeps like a blade. "We all came here to protect, but we also came because—" He stops and his mouth tightens. "Because each of us, in our stupidity, recognized you. Maybe not in the way you want to hear. But we saw a thing in you we never expected to need." Wyatt's fingers run over the knot rings he carries. "We'd like to ask you to form a bond with us," he says finally. "Not as a cage, not as a substitution for anything you fear. As a choice. As a way to make a family that chose each other." The room spins a little. The word bond is heavy with history, with myth, and with the warnings of a life where being claimed often meant the loss of choice. My mouth works for a second, looking for a shield of sarcasm. None comes. "You mean all 4 of you?" I say, because the quiet in the room makes my voice too loud otherwise. The men nod. Ken, who has not been loud in these days but has been the steady drumbeat behind us, comes forward. Ken isn't an alpha in the way the triplets are, but he is our second and he is integral to the Ridge. If we ask something personal, he is included because his presence is the pack's heartbeat. He meets my eyes. You can say no. I inhale. Consent is a strange and radical thing when it is offered whole. I think of the van and the 20 heartbeats and how those breaths made me more honest than fear would allow. I think of Eleanor's journal and the way history has been a map and a trap. I think of how many times my body has felt like evidence. Explain to me what this looks like, I say, because the world has taught me to make bargains explicit. They explain. It is not a theatrical ritual of domination. It is a pledge with roots in the Ridge's traditions, vows, gifts, the binding of hands with a knot ring made from a small piece of metal and woven with hair or a thread of fabric, intimate tokens that mean yes. It is a ceremony that binds consent as much as it binds presence. It is not a surrender of my agency. It is an agreement that we will build a life together in which one of us is never allowed to be turned into a political instrument again. We make conditions. No one may present my body as a spectacle at court. My reproductive history will never be used to diminish me. If the bond causes me pain, we will address it without coercion. They sit and listen, as if learning how to hold a fragile thing without cracking it. They argue and negotiate like men who understand territory and value freedom. They are earnest in the best way. The ceremony is small and private. It takes place in the Ridge's oldest hall, a room with beams charred by a long-ago fire and windows that watch pines like a quiet congregation. A small fire burns in the hearth, and the scent of cedar and stew hangs in the air. The children sleep in an adjoining room, their breaths a soft chorus. We sit in a circle. Ken speaks the words of intention for the pack, a leader's small prayer that is more a promise than a sermon. Ashton reads a passage from the journal, Eleanor's handwriting that speaks of family as an arrangement of choice rather than obligation. Kieran, who is not florid with speech, simply says what he feels. I will guard you. I will be honest with you. I will be soft where others are hard. Wyatt adds with his quiet compassion, I will warm you on the nights you're cold in ways that aren't only physical. I will keep making soup. There is a laugh at that, because it's true and domestic and human. When it's my turn, my hands shake so hard the knot ring crackles as it is slid on. I speak in the clumsy way of someone who has kept secrets from himself and is now letting them out. I will keep choosing you back, I say. I will keep saying yes if yes feels honest. I will not be property, I will be family. They all reach to touch the ring as if touching metal can make promises true. I feel the warmth of their hands and a strange, liquid easing in my chest. Being called Barren had been an attempt to measure me by my body alone. Now, in an odd, healing inversion, I am choosing to make family with men who are not asking for my body as proof of worth, but are asking for me as a partner in the long work of keeping other people safe. The bond is sealed with soft kisses, consensual, chosen, awkward, and tender. And then with sharing a bowl of stew, because someone always feeds the newly bonded. There is nothing about it that feels like an end. It feels like the beginning of scaffolding. We sleep that night in the same house but in different rooms because beginnings are not tidy and because each of us has ghosts to address. After the ceremony, healing takes the shape of small things. We colonize a kitchen where Wyatt is relentlessly domestic and makes me taste soups I thought I didn't deserve. Kieran insists on training me in defense drills and shows me how to hold a blade without hating it. Ashton teaches me how to write a formal letter to the council with a hand that makes diplomacy feel like armor. Ken sits with me when the shadows arrive, and sometimes he says nothing, which is more than anyone has offered me for years. The children become the center that keeps us honest. Rosie runs a tiny classroom in the back wing where the kids learn to read and speak with names that are not numbers. They build forts out of quilts and learn to be loud because loud is safety when the world is not trying to take you away. I find myself tucking a small boy into bed and humming a song that is not mine, because songs are small anchors and I suddenly have a reason to learn how to sing. Empathy remains a tool and a hazard. There are nights when the flood of other people's pain nearly drowns me. When a child's nightmare spills into my chest like cold water, and I wake with a scream lodged in my throat. I learn, slowly, to draw lines. How to hold the child's fear without absorbing the shape of it. The ridge gives me ways, medic techniques, time alone, enforced naps, that teach me how to be an instrument without snapping. Outside the ridge walls, the political world rearranges itself. Dominic's removal is not the end of the problem. There are men who will take his place if the council doesn't change its incentives. But the emergency reforms we pushed through begin to stick. Protocols are reviewed. An independent committee is formed to audit extinction claims. People talk about the morality of policy in new ways, not as an abstract, but as a set of consequences on small lives. Margaret Gray meets me again, not in a formal chamber but by a hearth where she likes to read. Her apology is brief and not theatrical. I wish I had seen it sooner, she says. I weighed the balance wrong. I understand, I say, because in a way everyone has to find their way out of the hard places they were raised into. You can help now. That's what matters. She nods, and in her eyes I find not total redemption, but the possibility of using power differently. She begins to take small actions to fund shelters and to seed programs that keep orphans from falling into bureaucratic erasure. It is not a grand solution, but it is a structural shift. There are consequences for Dominic. He is stripped of rank and privileges. Certain assets are frozen pending investigation. His allies scatter like birds. Vanessa, furious and bruised, moves between legal counsels that smell of expensive leather. She is not someone who takes loss gracefully. She files counterclaims and hires men to frame narratives around reckless vigilantes and dangerous populism. But her reach starts to wither because public sentiment is now a living thing with faces and names. The media that had previously followed Dominic like a son follows him no more. It finds instead the innocent faces of children who now have names on blankets and teachers who will not be threatened into silence. There are long debates on the council floor about the cost of leaving children to policy. Some men fall into the soft habit of arguing about numbers and stability. Others, most of them unexpected allies, begin saying things out loud. We cannot sanction the killing of the smallest among us. The Ridge monitors the reforms. We lobby for transparency and for community councils to have seats at the decision-making table. We press for mandatory oversight on any policy that affects pups and orphans. It is slow, slippery work, like trying to steer a stone through a shallow river. Bureaucracies resist being moved, but water finds a way. There are nights months later, when I sit on the ridge's outer wall and look at the pines and count heartbeats not in desperation but in gratitude. The 20 I saved sleep in rooms that smell of stew and clean sheets, and the endurance of men who've been forced to grow kinder by necessity. They come to me sometimes with simple, urgent questions. Eli, can you tell me another story? Eli, will you play? I answer with the awkward tenderness of a man learning how to be a father in fits and starts. The triplets and Ken become my home in a manner that refuses tidy labels. We're not a fairy tale forming. We're four flawed people who promise to build scaffolding for each other and for the children. There are fights, petty arguments over dishwashing, bigger ones about boundaries and privacy. There are tender things. Kieran showing up with a bandage and flaring at anyone who sneers at me. Wyatt making tea exactly how I like it. Ashton steering a delicate conversation with a council rep that prevents another crisis. We train together, we argue strategy, and we make love sometimes, and each time it is consensual in a way I needed to be taught to accept. They ask me before touching, even after we've been intimate for months. Their questions are not clinical, they're loving. They want to know where my scars sit, not as trophies but as places to be mindful of. They let me lead as often as I let them. It's messy and slow and human. The children grow loud. One of them, a girl with a fierce jawline and a laugh like breaking ice, asks me at breakfast once, Eli, will you always be with us? I swallow my coffee and smile. I tell her, I will try. No promises that I'm perfect, but I will try. She beams and climbs onto Kieran's lap like he was made to hold her. The Ridge gets used to headlines that say Ridge takes in orphans rather than Ridge defies council. The change in language matters. It changes conversations. Kids in other packages start to have small safeguards, committees to review custody, stamps on files that require an independent witness if any protocol suggests a culling. We call it less dramatically than extinction now. We call it accountability. Months from the van night, there is a small festival at the Ridge. They call it a naming day for the children. Rosie organizes it like a hymn, quilts and little bowls with names painted on the rims, cookies, and a storyteller who sings old mountain tales. The triplets and I sit on the low wall and watch the kids run like birds. Someone brings out Eleanor's journal, not as evidence now, but as something we place in a small glass-fronted box on the Ridge's shelf, a relic of a past that led us here. We do not worship lineage, but we honor the fact that knowing the truth about ourselves protects us from people who would misname others. At night, when everything is quiet and the fire is a patient thing, the four of us lie together. The house creaks, a small wind plays on the eaves, and somewhere a child's call echoes like a bell. My hand finds Ashton first, then Kieran, then Wyatt, then Ken's steady spine. They are hot and steady and oddly comfortable. I close my eyes and think of how the world used to tell me I was nothing. A verdict written like a diagnosis. Now, in a house that smells of stew and smoke and clean linen, I am chosen. There are times when the old shame claws at me, when a stranger in a market looks with bored pity at a man with my history, when a bureaucrat in some other pack asks the same old questions with the polite lined face of someone who thinks they are impartial. Those moments get to me. But the Ridge is a living corrective. They are there to cut off the old scripts before they finish, and to teach me to counter the slurs with directness and a refusal to be diminished. In private, we talk about what Barren meant, and what it meant to be measured by a singular test. I tell them the truth. That the label hurt because it came with a whole culture of meaning attached, that being called Barren by men in power taught me to craft my own worth by what I could rescue. They do not erase the hurt. They hold it with me until it becomes less jagged. The most healing thing, oddly, is the small domestic moments. Wyatt making tea just the right temperature. Kieran leaving a slice of bread for me on my night table. Ashton writing a letter to an eager young council rep about structural reforms as if his words could be an anchor. Ken, steady as tide, showing up to take me out on patrols not as a guard duty but as someone who keeps me safe. These are the scaffolding of an ordinary life that, for the first time, includes me. One evening, when the sky is bruised and the first snow of the season begins, I sit with the journal on my lap and trace Eleanor's handwriting. The Ridge children play in the courtyard, shrieking like gulls. The triplets and Ken stand talking quietly nearby, silhouettes against the firelight. I count 20 heartbeats again, not out of panic this time, but because the rhythm is my compass. 20 fingers tucked under quilts, 20 small futures that I had the audacity to steal into being. I am not naive enough to think this fixes the world. Policies can be rewritten. Men can be stripped of rank and replaced by other men who will try the same tactics. The work continues in boilerplate negotiations and late-night legal drafting, and the constant patience of training children and adults not to default to cruelty. But there is also a small, stubborn fact. 20 small people are alive in beds that smell like hope. We tend to those 20 with a kind of fierce boredom, homework, patching scraped knees, bandaging, singing the same 2 songs over and over until they stick. It's the unsexy work of nurturing, and it's the only kind that matters. In the evenings, I read aloud from the journal for those who will listen. Bits rewritten into stories so the children will know their past didn't start with an inked death sentence. It started with people who survived and chose to protect. There are awards and there are media requests and occasional furious letters from pacts that resent the Ridge's sudden moral posture. We handle them the only way we can, with paperwork, with counsel, and with the persistent public narrative that names people and policies and refuses to let cruelty be sanitized as administration. We hold town halls where the community learns about trauma and where we try to teach procedures to keep children safe. We lobby other leaders to install safeguards. That work is unsexy, necessary, and relentless. At night, the triplets and Ken kneel again, but this time it is a private habit we've created. Not a pageant, but a ritual of gratitude. A brief moment before sleep when each of them says aloud something the day did right. Sometimes it's a childish thing like, "We found the missing sock," and sometimes it is heavy like, "We spoke truth today." I watch them and find myself grateful in a way I didn't know how to be. People ask if the court changed me. The answer is complicated. The court gave me a platform and forced a reckoning that I did not expect to want. I used it because I had no alternative. 20 lives depended on it. The court did not heal my scars. People did. The Ridge's patience, the children's screams of joy that leak through our sleep, Ken's quiet, Ashton's steadiness, Kieran's avenging softness, Wyatt's domestic tenderness, all of these have been the real medicine. The last time I go back toward the van spot in my memory, the road is a carved incision of white, and the van is a hollowed-out thing full of sleeping people. I press my palm to the place on my chest where the journal sits. It is warm not just from the friction of pages but from something else, an ember of belonging now fanned by others. I do not become invincible. I remain a man who sometimes wakes in the night with panic like a wolf at the windows. But I am not alone. If anyone asks me what I have learned, I would tell them that labels are tools people use to make decisions about other people when they don't want to be held accountable. Barren was a label meant to erase me, but the grief attached to it made me brave enough to try something reckless. I saved 20 children because I refused to let human worth be measured by a narrow test. The Ridge and the Triplets taught me that choosing to stay and to bond is also an act of defiance, a different claim on life than the one the council tried to make. We keep moving forward, the same as any story that has to do the messy work of repair. There are setbacks, petitions overturned, men with influence trying to rewrite headlines, the slow grind of implementing structural guardrails. There are victories too. A new oversight committee ratified, a shelter funded, school enrollments that put names to faces. There is laughter, and there is the persistent thrum of small human tragedies that remind us to be vigilant. On a bright morning some months after the tribunal, I walk into the children's room and see a row of small feet lined up like a parade. One of the girls, she has now declared herself a defender of missing things, runs up and throws her arms around my leg. "Eli," she says, "we made cards for you." They hold up a ragged strip of paper sewn together with glitter and clumsy handwriting that reads in several variants and spellings, "Thank you, Eli." It's untidy and glorious and utterly irrefutable. My throat tightens, and I kneel down to put my forehead to theirs like some old ritual of apology and promise. Kieran comes up behind me and wraps an arm around my shoulder. "You have fans," he says, mock grave. "I do," I reply. I look at Ashton, Wyatt, and Ken who have gathered, their faces soft and tired. We all share the same ridiculous, dangerous smile of people who have built a life by saying yes to each other. There are times now when I count heartbeats, and I don't do it to keep panic at bay. I do it because I can. I count them and they make sense, and they are proof. Proof that a small, stubborn act in a van in the middle of a storm can, somehow, rewrite the arcs of many lives. I have 4 men who chose to kneel to a better kind of promise, and 20 small people who learn to sleep again. That does not mean the work is done. It means the work has meaning. The Ridge is not a perfect place. It has its own flaws, its own history of compromises, but it is a place that now belongs, in part, to people who cannot be listed as liabilities in a signed memo. It belongs to children who will grow up learning how to argue for their rights. It belongs to me, messy and flawed and not entirely healed, who no longer feels compelled to make myself small for the comfort of others. That night, as the wind scrolls itself into the pines and the Ridge settles into a different kind of watchful silence, I step out onto the small porch and breathe the cold air. The journal is on the table inside, the knot ring cool on my finger. The Triplets and Ken stand around a sputtering brazier, their faces carved into shadow and light. Between them and the children and the legal cabinets full of evidence and the corridor that leads to the council and the van I once drove away in, there is a path. I close my eyes and, because habit dies hard, I count 20 heartbeats. Not because I'm trying to control myself, but because I like to remember the first time I did it in a small van and what it led to. Heartbeat 1 and 2 and 3, and I'm warmed by the knowledge of what those rhythms mean now. I feel their slow, steady insistence like a new kind of law. I whisper, almost to myself. We did the right thing. Ken laughs softly, a sound like gravel, and says, We did something that mattered. That will have to be enough. It is enough for tonight. It will not always be enough. But there are bowls waiting to be filled, children to be taught to read, policies to be watched. There are also hands to hold and a bed with 4 warm shapes and a man who no longer has to pretend to be invisible. I rest my palm on the journal inside and the leather is warm, as if the past itself has learned to keep company with the present. I go to bed with the ridge's roofs heavy with snow, and wake up to a house that smells like stew and effort and the impossible comfort of chosen family. If you like this rescue, this slow burn and messy victory, and want more BL pack stories where found family fights back against corrupt power, consider staying, subscribe, and keep us company. There are more nights, more fights, and more quiet mornings ahead, and we could use witnesses.